Here at Seven Fitness Series, we talk about living a balanced life above the line. We talk about leveraging the powerful present moment and using that clarity of mind, clarity of consciousness, and clarity of thought to make better decisions so that we're not living our lives 95% by habit. We also have to deal with limiting beliefs and feelings of inadequacy or self-doubt. But let's start where we are right there. So here's an example. Let's say you're in business and you have this product or service. This is the direction that you're going. And you start to notice that there's a little bit of resistance. But what do? We're taught to push on. You got to keep going, man. Don't quit. Don't have a plan B. Go. But your profit's a little bit lower. Maybe your revenue is up, but your profit's down, but you're pushing through. You're waiting for it to turn around. You're doing what you're supposed to do. You don't want to be that guy who stops 3 feet from goal. But then you feel a little bit more resistance, but you still carry on. And now you're even lower. And this can go on until you're actually going backwards. And the question is, when do you stop? What's your metric for when enough is enough and you do something different? I would argue, number one, it's not necessarily stop. What we're going to talk about here is pivot. Now, if you've ever had a business problem, you understand pivoting, and you understand that if you pivot early enough, you have resources to fund that pivot. If you wait too long, then it's more difficult to make that pivot, and there's opportunities that you can't take advantage of. Now, there's a point of view that says you don't want a plan B because anybody who's had a plan B has always ended up needing it. And I can argue that side. I can argue both sides. But the reason why that's so true is you have the plan B, you start making pictures of it, and we know that we attract what we picture. We attract that to ourselves. So if you're making a picture of this plan B, you're going to create the conditions for that plan B, especially if you're allowing your subconscious to run the show. And by making pictures of it every day, guess what? That becomes more real. That becomes more familiar than struggling against whatever you're going through with the resistance. But let's say you pivot. Now, let's say, taking this example further, that this was a passion type service or business. You were doing something that was much aligned with your passion. Well, when you start running into that resistance, you can pivot. Maybe it's too soon here, but I would argue that by the time the arrow gets, this arrow is your profit, right? By the time the arrow gets there and you're still running into resistance, I would say that might be too late. So what you want to do is pivot somewhere where it makes sense. And by thinking this through in advance, in the powerful present moment, with a clear mind, clear consciousness, clear thought, in your planning, your strategy time, you can pivot. Now, what do you pivot to? If you thought this through, you can pivot to purpose. So I have purpose and passion. Too many times people confuse passion and purpose. They'll say, well, they say if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Do what you love and the money will follow. I think that's true when there's a purpose element. And by the way, when you're running into this resistance, when you're going at it just for passion, that resistance can get pretty big. If you're on purpose and you're running into that resistance, you can keep going forward, because even if you're having to eat ramen noodles, you're working on your purpose. And for those of you who are younger, your purpose is going to be the same. Whatever you figure out your purpose is, it's not going to change much. You'll refine it, you'll articulate it differently, but remember, our brain is 50,000 years old. So the brain you were born with is not necessarily the brain you're going to die with, then that's because of neuroplasticity. But your heart and your mind and what you love and all that, that's going to stay pretty much the same. So now you pivot to purpose, and then the same thing starts to happen. So now you're going up here and you get some resistance and you push through it and you get some resistance. And at some point, I like this thing. If something happens once, you take note. If it happens twice, you start paying attention more closely, start measuring. It happens a third time, you accept it as a pattern, and it's going to continue. So 3 times, 3 major resistances, maybe it's time to pivot. I didn't say close your business. I'm saying pivot. But the other thing you're going to do is this. This is what I've got drawn there. And you're pivoting from purpose and passion. But what we're going to do, we're going to modify this some. Because as you move through this, you're going to refine your purpose. You're going to refine your passion and narrow that. And so now these lines come in. So instead of pivoting the entire 90 degrees, we're going to pivot to here. And then you pivot back to here. And you can even be in a situation where perhaps this cone gets even narrower. But if you're looking forward and you're pivoting from passion to purpose, you can see that when things get tough, you always have a direction to go. Doing this with a clear mind and clear thought and uncontaminated present moment is a lot easier than reacting, which again, why we don't want to be doing things by habit. So there's one more part of this that I want to point out. And I'm going to use the word services, but it can apply to a product or service. We have new customers or a new market, right? New customers or a new market. And down here we have existing customers. And on the cross axis, existing services, and we have new services. Let's go ahead and turn that into a box. And so now you have quadrants. So new products or services to new customers, this area has a level of difficulty with it and risk because there's two unknowns. If you're going to have new services for existing customers, you already have the relationship, you know what their wants and needs are. This one is a little bit better to go after. You can do new services with existing customers. If you want to do new customers with existing services, same thing. You already have a proven track record with these existing services. You have some testimonials, you have ad copy, you have your pipelines, your ads are already done. It's a lot easier to move over into new customers. So as you pivot from passion to purpose, you don't do it willy-nilly, but you're doing so in the context of am I moving to existing customers with new services, or am I moving to existing services with new customers? And then this one is the area where your growth is going to be lower here because now you're relying on population growth essentially as the population grows, or maybe a little bit of word of mouth. But here's where your growth is. But remember, we started the conversation about this pivoting because we were getting some resistance. So if you're in here, existing services and existing customers, and you're in here and you're starting to hit into that resistance, that could be a signal to move to one of these other quadrants. And again, I would recommend watching this one, being careful, because it's a lot of risk when you're doing new customers and new services, and there's just too many unknowns. So there you go. Pivot to purpose, pivot to passion, and repeat. And the reason for this is you can always pivot back to purpose. And again, even if you have to eat ramen noodles for a point in time or several months, several years, because it's your purpose and it's your life's work, it's easier to do. And so you may ask, well, how my work is not related to purpose, it's not related to passion. Well, that's why maybe this starts a little bit wider. Maybe your pivoting is wider, but you want to keep bringing it in. You want to connect it, because if you're doing new services and new customers, you can move towards closer and closer and closer to where you're bringing your passion and purpose. Now, I'm oversimplifying it. It's a 10-minute conversation, but the concept is on point.